So we're going to move from harassment and murder to a policy of genocide here for the Nazis. Um, One of the best examples of this is Warsaw. Once Germany took over Poland, they took the traditional part of the city that had the Jewish culture, the Jewish ghetto, and they walled it off, and they shipped all the Jews they could find in the city to the ghetto. And if you can see the picture on the right, on the top left, they're harassing them. In the bottom right, they're lining up just about to shoot them. They didn't allow any food or water into the ghetto, and so thousands died of starvation. Disease breakouts happened because there was no running water in the ghetto. That was shut off too. And that's just one example of what happened. There's some great examples in the Warsaw Ghetto, the uprising that happened there that eventually failed. There's a movie called The Pianist, about a piano player who ends up in the Warsaw Ghetto, that came out a few years ago. That's a great movie. Another example is an Einsatzgruppen, which was a mobile killing squad used when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, and that would line up or round up the communist leaders and Jewish citizens in that part of the Soviet Union and kill them. In Kiev alone, 33,000 were lined up and killed, and there's a picture of the Einsatzgruppen in their uniform, and here's a huge pit they dug, and if you can look in the left-hand side of that pit, you can actually see some citizens about to be executed into the pit. And there's another picture of a man about to be executed into the pit. This is all done, these are all Russians. Next slide. For the Nazis at the Wannsee Conference, the Nazis agreed to create this final solution which is, of course, to create a series of camps where the genocide would occur. These camps started in Poland, but there were a few of them in Germany. There were more of them in Romania. It was a deliberate. Remember, genocide is a deliberate destruction of an ethnic group. This was one of your vocabulary words. This would be used against all of Europe's Jews. So when the Germans went into France, they rounded up the Jews, shipped them on rail cars back to Poland to where these camps were. And here you can see some of them. As most of you probably know, in the death camps, they used poison gas in artificial showers to gas the citizens, and then they would use ovens to burn the bodies. But they also used these camps for forced labor for wartime products that they needed to fight the war. Which sometimes led to, if they could get away with it, to some of the inmates in these camps purposefully sabotaging some of the things. And that was actually a problem later in the war for Germany. But lack of food, as you know from your book, lack of medical care, all these things, starvation, forced labor led to death, executions led to death, mass killing in the gas chambers led to death. Next slide. We'll see this at the Air Force Museum. They have a couple of examples of this, of the train system, but they transported the Jews around Europe by train. Elderly women with children, the sick and weak, they were all killed right off the bats, because women, particularly women with children, would become so upset and sick of not having their children around that they just decided that they weren't going to deal with women with children. The elderly weren't going to be able to work. The sick were going to be peeled off and killed. These are some pictures of some bunks. As you know, men and women were tattooed with ID numbers. Their heads were shaved to keep lice and other, that's one of the things they did, but also to dehumanize them. They slept on wooden bunks, sometimes without mattresses. They had very few rations for food. Here you can see an example of some of the tattooing. Because of the poor conditions, diseases swept through the camp. Sometimes entire sections of the camp would have to be pulled out and gassed or shot because there was a disease outbreak in that area of the camp. All right, this is the end of part 2, and I'll really try to finish this in part 3.